We are live. Okay. Hi, Varun. Thanks very much for coming on the
All
show.
good. Yeah.
And I would like to tell the viewers that Varun is a solicitor in Queensland, and we're going to talk a lot about soliciting or conveyancing, what's the difference and all that. But before we start, I will really like Varun to tell us something about him, how he thought becoming a lawyer, where he studied, and why he actually chose Queensland or Brisbane when he could have gone to Sydney or Melbourne, big cities.
Thanks, Avi. As Avi just introduced me, my name is Varun Gupta, and I'm a commercial and property lawyer at Rostron Carlyle Ross Lawyers in Brisbane. It's a CBD firm. We're a mid-sized firm. Um, I've been a commercial and property lawyer for almost 2 years now, and
Wow.
I studied in the UK. So I did my law degree in the UK. But as I essentially suffer from seasonal depression and the weather being gloomy and wet in the UK, I moved to the beautiful Sunshine Coast. It's nice and sunny, reminds me of home. I'm originally from India.
Oh,
And the opportunities in Southeast market is a lot more than the saturated markets in Sydney and Melbourne. So you must have seen this, Abby. We've seen this in our property market that there's a
yes.
traction in the Southeast and there are people who want to move to the Southeast. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of potential for people to move to Southeast Queensland, more specifically Brisbane and the coast.
Now, look, when we started this segment, we started talking with our team and everything, and I told them, look, this place is full of opportunities. I've
Absolutely.
seen Sydney grow from I've seen those TVs coming up and population just exploding out of nowhere.
Exactly.
And where there were big lands, you could walk and all that stuff. We could actually see deers and
Yes.
in winters. We can't see anything now because there are highways, there are motorways, there are houses. And
Yeah.
then when you come here in Brisbane, people are moving in herds. Like before the coronavirus came in last year, in 2019, there were like approximately 20,000 people from every state moving into Brisbane.
Exactly.
And it's a lovely state. I love it. It can
Yeah.
be a little bit hot, but I still prefer being, in summers where you can go to Gold Coast, you can go to Sunshine Coast, and you have plenty of activities that you can do.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's more like a learning experience
Yes.
for the generations to come, my children. And that's why I always tell people, if you really want to grow and you want to experiment at what you're good at,
Hmm.
come to Queensland and have
Absolutely.
fun. So
100% agree with you. Yeah.
as I said, people generally go to conventions,
Yeah.
and like when we were talking briefly before we met, and we went through it, people think convincing and soliciting is one and same thing, but
Yeah.
you actually opened my eyes on it. So can you briefly explain what's the difference between a solicitor and a convincer?
Yeah. Um, Essentially, we complement each other. Conveyancer and a solicitor essentially do the same thing to a certain extent. So, when someone signs a property contract, the next thing that they look for is a conveyancer or solicitor. We do the same procedures. We get the deal completed. We get the transaction settled. We do everything that's needful for a conveyancing process. But where a solicitor stands out a little bit more than a conveyancer, where there's some special conditions involved, where there's something that may go wrong and you don't want it to go wrong. If you're buying a property for, say, $500,000 or say upwards of $500,000, um, yes, you're investing in your property, but you're also investing in a risk that you don't know of.
Yes.
The conveyancer would do searches for your property, but there might be certain things that the seller might be trying to pass on the risks to you that you might not be wary of. So provisions like warranty, the seller's warranty, provisions like special conditions, things like that is where the solicitors come in and draft certain conditions which are very special to your circumstances, that go into the contract. That contract, or any contract per se, if it's signed, is bound to both the parties. So if there's anything that goes wrong by the seller, then you are in a safer position because you got that in the contract. And we always suggest anyone who's signing a contract first to get their contract reviewed before they sign it. We always have people sign, we get signed contracts all the time, and it's very common for us to just get signed contract and we run with the conveyance process. But there's always pre-conveyancing and post-conveyancing that goes on.
Yeah.
Pre is very important. Pre-conveyance is basically where you have to have um, some negotiations on commercial terms. If you have commercially agreed on certain things, then it has to be legally recorded in an instrument. It has to be legally recorded in paper for it to actually be binding to both the parties. If it's unfavorable, if you're buying something and if there's a risk that's being passed, then the risk should be negotiated. As a first home buyer, there's a lot of hand-holding process there.
So in that process, like I can give a small example. Like one of my clients, he actually bought a property,
Mm-hmm.
and um, the risk was that the rates notice, like we pay the council rates and everything.
Yep.
So the previous owner was actually in arrears like for like 6 months.
Wow.
So I guess what happened was he came to me and said, look, this is what happened. So
Yeah.
after everything was done, the settlement was done and all that stuff, I think somewhere, somehow, it's a very small thing, but it was overlooked. So now
Absolutely.
in that case, I don't think that the buyer can actually go back to the seller and ask for that rates to be paid back, isn't it? So now it's become a liability for the buyer because he didn't do his due diligence, or like the conveyancer didn't do the proper researches on it or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, essentially, the buyer still has the right, but there's always a limitation period. If you are going back after 7 months, saying that we settled a property 7 months ago, and you owe me rates for something that you owe to the council, then that's too late. The other
So
thing is that the buyer still has right, but coming to think of it, the liability is already taken, or the buyer already takes the liability on the day of settlement. And problem with that is, although you can keep claiming for the money that the seller or the previous owner owed to the council, in reality or in practice, are you ever going to get it back? It's about, even if it's a nominal $500-$600, are you going to bust your guts to get that $500-$600 back? It's always better to get these adjustments, and that's where, when we speak about searches, I'll tell you more as to what happens in searches and why it's very important for us to have those correct searches for us to do the right adjustments at
right,
appropriate
adjustment.
segments.
Because I think for first home buyers, when we talk about first home buyers, they're always very critical of money.
Yes,
and
and they should
and
be.
like frankly, like when you start paying your mortgage and then you start painting your house, you see, okay, I need to paint this, I need to get fixed and all that stuff. Even like in one of my cases, when I was talking to Rahul, the pest control expert, he told me that he once went to a house and the house had termites, and
Yep.
that didn't do the pest or termite for whatever reason. Maybe he's trying to save costs or something, and they thought, like, looking at the house, it looks beautiful. But when they realized, it was way too late, and because those searches don't come into from solicitor side, but
No.
in the end, anything can be passed on to the buyer, and by the time buyer actually realizes what's being done,
Yes.
because I think in a we are in a honeymoon period when you buy a buy a
Exactly.
house, and we are
Yeah.
like living it, we are enjoying it, we are trying to make changes to it, we are just having fun around it. And then bills start coming in, and you find some things that were not actually disclosed prior to the buying the property, or there were a few things overlooked. Then we start realizing, oh, no, we made a mistake. I should have, should I talk to my conveyancer? But I think conveyancer is not the right person to go back to. You have to go to a solicitor and
Yeah.
get those things sorted if you have to.
Exactly. And having a solicitor for anyone who's in a property transaction, essentially what we do, we are very pessimist by nature. we think of all of the things that can go wrong for you.
Go wrong.
And that's our job. And that's our job. We have to think of the worst case scenarios for things that can go wrong for you and how we can protect you. And if we don't think like this, and if we think, oh, everything's going to be fine, then if
Uh,
certain things go wrong, then it's not ethically good for us, and it's not ethically diligent on our side to think. If we are thinking about the client, then we have to protect the client in every manner possible. And that's where contract negotiations, drafting correct clauses that will go into the contract is absolutely critical. Anything that is ambiguous or anything that opens to confusion or arguments or discussions will lead nowhere. You need conclusive clauses in the contract. You need something which is very objective and can directly point out whose liability this is. So things like that is very, very important.
because I firmly believe that first home buyers are mostly very optimistic. They're
Yes.
optimistic that loan's going to be done. They're optimistic the house is going to be handed over beautifully. The settlement date's going to be met. The finance clause is going to be met. So they are more of very optimistic kind of transaction. But when we look into a solicitor, we have to make sure that we are going to deal with someone who is pessimistic, who's going to take care of like it's more like a two sides of coin. Say
Exactly.
if the first home buyers or anyone who's buying a property or commercial property, investment property, they
Exactly.
always look on the positive side of things.
Yep.
It's natural.
Yep.
It's more like nobody wants to get a nasty surprise. They just want to see, okay, this is done.
Yeah.
But the solicitor on the other side is just trying to make sure that in the end you get the right deal, you get
Correct.
everything done correctly, and you don't have to worry
Correct.
about it. And it's a solicitor's liability to make sure that the transaction actually happens in a nice and timely way
Yep.
without
And
any
just
nasty
to
surprise.
just to add on to that, Avi, I would tell you one of the circumstances as a case study here. I was acting for first home buyers, and they were buying a property in Red Bank Plains. And essentially, what had happened is they bought this existing dwelling. They were really happy about this. Settlement happened, and just before settlement, 5 minutes before the settlement, they got to know that the seller is not ready to move out of the property just yet,
No, come on.
and they wanted to get into the property. They wanted to settle the transaction because there's a lot of bank interest, as you know. There's everything that's involved,
Yep.
and getting those time essence and getting those time dates right is very important in a contract. And quickly, I had to, in a matter of 5 minutes, I had to draft a clause and pass it on to the seller's lawyers and make them agree to that clause, which essentially said that the seller will not be the registered owner after the settlement that happens at 2 o'clock,
That makes
and
sense. Yep.
will just occupy the property as a licensee. And in event anything goes wrong in the property, the seller will be liable. And if there's any damages to the property after settlement, it's the seller's liability. If you don't think
Psychology.
of all of that, then if, say, for example, the settlement goes through and the buyer still has not got the property completely handed over, seller's no one anymore. Seller's not the registered owner anymore, and they can do anything they want with the property. And you need to have that risk factor passed on to the seller. It's highly, very important, I would say.
I think that is on point. Like I'm really thanks for that, because
Yeah,
there are so many things that go wrong. Like there are 90% of transactions maybe go smoothly without any problems, but those 10% where sometimes when the sellers move out, they might damage a wall, they might
exactly.
break a closet, or they when they're moving out, because a lot of stuff that's going to move out of the house, and
Yeah,
there's a big probability that something is going to get damaged when they're going to move those furnitures on all that stuff, if
yeah,
if it's not a brand new home. But yeah,
yeah,
it's a great point. But
yeah,
then we come to a next thing, like when we go into searches. So
yeah,
people ask, like are you asking for this searches? Do I need to have this search done?
yeah.
And there might be optional searches. So as like what are the mandatory searches and what are the optional searches in that regards? Because as we know in Queensland, if the viewers are watching, you can actually go to Queensland Council website,
Mhm.
and you can actually go around and see if there's a noise, if there's a bushfire close to your house, if there's a flooding,
Yes.
everything. So there's a e-plan map, and you can
Yeah.
actually navigate your way through it. But there's a catch to it, which Varun is going to explain in a very, very beautiful way.
See, when we categorize, and as you've rightly categorized mandatory and optional, when we say mandatory, it's these standard searches that the council has records of for the property that you're buying. And yes, you can get it from the council, and you can apply at a very, it's not, I wouldn't say cheaper, but it still come with a price. You can apply it to the council. But bureaucracy of every country is beautiful. If the
They are all the same, isn't it? Where you have politicians, I think you have that.
uh, getting a council's application, getting the application through would not be a problem, but getting the result could cause significant delay. Say, for example, I've got a settlement in 14 days from now. If I order searches directly from the council, the odds are that I would get that searches in 10 to 14 business days, which is after my settlement.
After
There's no
percent.
point of getting searches back for your property after the settlement. As solicitors and conveyancers and all most of the law firms here, what we do is we have connections with good searching partners, and what we do is we engage with them, and with their niche expertise on getting these searches faster and their tie-ups with the council, um, with a bit more admin fee, because of course everyone has to be incentivized to do anything. They
Makes
get
sense. Yeah.
searches quickly for us and right in time before settlement. And these standard searches include, and I would say for a first home buyer, for any buyer who's buying property, and this is from a buyer's perspective, three standard searches, if you're not buying a vacant land, is the rate search, the special
Makes sense.
water meter reading, and you're looking at the land tax. The reason why any solicitor or conveyancer would do these three searches is because you don't want to be carrying on, as just we spoke, any liability that the seller owes to the council after settlement. Say, for example, there's a rates owing of $300 or $400 prior to settlement. We will have that adjusted at the balance proceeds that you are paying to the seller. So if you're paying 400,000, you're not paying 400,000, you're paying 400,000 minus the council rates.
Also
There'll be a
tax.
check that'll go to the council. It's the same with water. So if you have to pay, if the seller owes the Queensland Urban Utilities, or if it's Moreton Bay Council, it's the Unity Water, then you have to pay those water bills, and the seller must pay those water bills prior to settlement.
Prior
And
to that.
it's the same with land tax. If you owe the Office of State Revenue a land tax, if the seller owes, then you don't want to take that. You don't want to take that liability of $1,000 or $2,000 for you to pay it right after the settlement, or chase the seller for that. So
No,
these are the
no,
three standard searches that we recommend, and we strongly recommend that we must do these three searches for you. Yes, they come with a cost, and it varies. And Avijay, I'll tell you how these all vary. They vary from council to council. If you're looking at Brisbane City Council, it's a different ball game. It's Gold Coast City Council has a different way of giving searches. Moreton Bay is absolutely different. So council searches have their own different
no.
fees,
Different searches.
and that's why we give, whenever anyone asks us how much is it going to cost if we just do the standard searches, we say it could cost anywhere between $200 to $300, $300 to $400, because we can't pinpoint and say this is how much it's going to cost.
That's the whole point of it. Like, because now we have summarized it. Like when we get those searches done, it's actually done through a third party. It's not done through councils. So
Yes.
that's why there's a charge on it. That's going to be admin fee on it. There's a service charge. But in the end, you're getting those services quickly rather than
Yes,
waiting for 14 days. And
absolutely.
that's the whole charges and fees and involved in it. Plus, I think there's your fee plus these searches, isn't it?
So whenever we quote our professional fees, or whenever we quote the entire fees for doing a conveyance, we always say it's professional fees plus GST plus outlays. And what spins most of these people off is, what do you mean by outlays? And I right now want to break this and be absolutely transparent. Is outlays is anything that goes straight to the government or straight to the council. Any searches cost, any transfer duty that you have to pay, any titles registration fee that you
Hmm.
have to pay, which we don't take, it's going straight to the government. We have no control over that. So we have to always say this is our professional fees plus GST plus outlays. And
Outlays. Yeah.
essentially outlays is searches, any transfer duty that you owe to the Office of State Revenue, and the title registration fee that goes to the title registration department for you becoming the registered owner with the transfer documents. Generally, if you've got a financier involved and if there's a mortgagee coming in, from your loan proceeds, the mortgagee takes that title registration fees off. They will take that off because they are the ones who will be putting a mortgage form, and they'll be putting the transfer document and submitting that to the government because there's a mortgage over your property.
Mortgage
So
over it.
all the
So
different
from
breakdowns.
so that's the point, is that there's a your fee, there is a searches fee, and there is an outlaw what is it, outlays.
Outlays.
So
Yes.
outlays. So I was saying outlaw. I'm watching too many movies. I think Netflix will take it over me. So it's more like so they are outlays. Outlays are out of they are out of pocket expenses going straight to the councils and banks for transferring the mortgage, council costs, and everything. It
Correct.
has nothing to do with the conveyancer cost or anything. So they are
Nothing.
those mandatory costs that you're
Yes.
going to take on the chin when you buy a property. Simple as.
Absolutely. And it's very important that every person who's coming to a solicitor or trying to retain a solicitor, it's very important for them to ask these questions. And we invite such questions when they ask what is involved, because we are not buying the property, it's them who are
Yeah,
buying the property. And the more transparent you are, and there's more transparency and clear communication between the client and the solicitor, the better the conveyancing process is, the better the transaction is.
transaction is. As I
Yeah.
always say in every segment I talk to anyone, if first home buyers doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. All right.
Yeah.
Solicitors are there to help you understand the transaction. So there's
Exactly.
nothing to be scared of or nothing to be worrying about. Oh, I shouldn't be asking solicitor this question because he might get mad and he's going to take care of my transaction and all that. The solicitors, in my opinion, if I'm not wrong, solicitors are legally bound to work or um, look at the best interest of the client, isn't it?
Absolutely. And our solicitors' conduct rules say that we have to work in the best interest of the client. And if there's any conflict of interest, then we cannot take on work for the client. So it
So
is absolutely important for us to work in the best interest of the client.
no, like this is what we want people to understand. That
Yes,
doesn't matter. It's solicitor. It doesn't matter. It's a seller. Doesn't matter. It's a builder. It doesn't matter. It's anyone you're dealing with. It have those guts or have the courage to ask those questions. Very important. It's very important
absolutely.
for your peace of mind. It's very important. Frankly, no question is wrong. Like simple
Yeah,
as that.
yeah,
There's no silly questions,
and
anything.
there should be no stigma attached. Any question you have, if you have 100 questions, please throw at your solicitor. And the reason why I say that is there's always something will come out of it, and you'll be like, right, I am convinced that this person can answer all my questions, and it's a very transparent process. Anyone who's not telling you exactly what's going on, then that's the red mark, that's the red signal,
That's
that's
right,
the red
Mark.
flag for you.
There you go. So now we want to talk about those critical dates in a contract
Yeah.
and why people need to be very careful when they go into a contract or first, well, they're buying their first home or they're buying an investment property.
Yeah. um, all the property transactions, all the property contracts in Queensland is something called time of the essence contract. Time is very important in all the property contracts. It's very important, and we say this quite a lot of times, and I emphasize this every day with all my clients, that you must meet deadlines. There are
Yeah.
strong repercussions to not meeting those dates. I'll tell you that about in our next segment. But what essentially these critical dates are: A is your contract date. So if I'm talking about from the buyer's perspective of first home buyers, yes, you've got the contract date. That's the date when you've signed the contract. You may have a building and pest date. So you might have, if you're buying an existing dwelling, then you might want to check if there's any sort of termite issue, if there's any sort of building issue in the property. Then you might have a building and pest date, say 14 days from the contract date. 14 days from contract date. You might even have another, if you are extra careful and if you want to be very cautious about buying the property and you want to do all the things possible to test the property, then you might even have a due diligence a date.
Yes, because
You
I
might,
think in Queensland, like properties are pretty old, so we
yes,
have to make sure that we do the due diligence at all times.
exactly,
It's very
exactly. And
important.
if you're buying an existing dwelling, we highly recommend that you have a due diligence period. And then, as you know, Avi, we've got the finance state. And
Yes.
currently, in this COVID environment, we've seen that hitting finance is is become a dream.
It's
21 days finance date has become a dream. No one is getting 21 finance date. So that's where
no.
we always say commercially, when you agree to the contract, try and get a longer finance date, not 21 days. Try and get 28 days, or probably, if it's much better if you get a 35 days if the seller agrees. The right
I have
reason,
a
but
45 days, one of my
wow,
contracts. But I think thanks to the real
that's
estate agent,
surprising.
like he was very understanding. It's
Yeah,
like because we want to make sure, like, as professionals, that the transaction is as stress-free as possible. Simple as that. If
yeah,
I'm gonna give them 21 days and they come back to me, I'm saying nothing happened, mate. We need extension.
yeah.
And I got a random call from someone yesterday, and it is true. I won't name it or anything, but I used to work for in Sydney when I was working with one of my colleagues in a company. I got a random call from someone, I don't know who, and he said, I went on Google and found your number, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to get in contact with such and such person. Can you help me? I'm like,
Yeah,
mate, I left that business long time ago. So what happened? He's like, I've already extended the finance twice,
yeah,
and I can't get hold of the broker to help me out to see what's happening on the file. So that means extension. He's already like 2 weeks behind the finance,
yeah.
and like those experiences, those things. I When I talk to someone, I just tell them flat in the face, look, if you are gonna be doing a transaction now, try to get 45 days. Try to negotiate it, because
Yes,
in the end, I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to put too much stress on any of the parties. If we get it
exactly.
before that, beautiful.
Very
But
good.
yeah,
Yes,
that's so you can continue. Sorry about
yes.
that.
No, no,
I couldn't stop myself.
absolutely right, Avi. I think that the other thing is that even if, say, you have a 21 days finance date, if on the 20th day that you feel like, and if after your conversations with your broker, you realize that you're not going to hit the 21 days, please go back to your conveyancer or solicitor before the finance date and tell them, I don't think we can hit the 21 finance date. Can we request an extension for 2 weeks? It's always, and I would say it's the best strategy possible to request an extension of the finance date before the finance date or on the day of
Oh,
finance and not later. The reason why I say that is, if you request an extension of the finance date after your finance date is expired, then you are in a breach of contract. And if you are
that's
in breach of
what.
contract,
Yep.
yeah, and if you're in a breach of contract, there are some strong repercussions to that. If as if you've paid initial deposit of $1,000 and if you paid other balance deposit of, say, $20,000, you have 25 or $21,000 sitting in someone's
Hmm.
holder's trust account. And what happens there is, if the deposit is sitting there and if you are in the breach of contract, then the seller is entitled to take that deposit. And
Oh,
more
okay.
than that, if the special conditions read that the seller is allowed to come after you for other things, then the seller has a right to even sue you, or even have something called a specific performance, can force you to
Oh,
buy the property. So
makes sense.
you have to be very careful that if you're not able to meet the deadline, then you request the extension on the day of deadline. And when I say that, is yes, you may request an extension for 2 weeks, but you may not get 2 weeks, and the seller may say, can't give you 2 weeks, and we want to terminate the contract. In that case, you requested an extension for 2 weeks on the settlement date, and if the seller terminates the contract, you will get that deposit back. And you, no matter it, you may not get the property, but you will still hold on to your deposit. But
Got it.
after the
Yep.
finance date is expired, and or after any other date is expired, you try and satisfy or seek an extension, then you're already in a breach. And the seller can either, if it's a nice happy seller, it's already lined up another buyer, can give you that deposit back. But if you're the only buyer and you've been holding on to this entire contract for 2 months, can be very agitated, or he or she can be like,
Agitated.
I'm not giving you
Your
a
money
deposit.
back. Your money is gone.
Yeah, and you
You
don't
get
want
this
that.
one. No.
Yeah, so
So that's the. Sorry, sorry.
uh,
Yes, continue.
all of that is very, very important. Meeting those dates, and the other thing is breach of contracts. You don't want any. You, as a buyer or even as a seller, I would say, please try and avoid any risk. Speak to your solicitor. Speak to your conveyancer. Keep your solicitor and conveyancer informed at all point of time. We are working for you, we're working with you. The reason why we keep saying that is, um, we want the transparent to be we want the entire process to be as transparent as possible. And if there's somewhere, and if there's a risk that you may be in breach, then we would want to avoid that breach. And the reason why we want to avoid that breach is, we don't want uh, any sort of damages, or any repercussions,
Confusion.
confusions.
Yes.
Exactly, it's confusion, and confusion then leads to any sort of litigation, and you don't
Chaos.
want yeah, exactly,
I
and you don't
always
want to.
always tell my child the same thing. We went to to a picnic the other day, and we were in the water, and we were trying to raft. So and in the middle of the when we were in the middle of the river, he looked at me. He's like, Dad, are we in trouble? I'm like, no, mate. So look, even if we're in trouble, what's the first thing? He says, like, don't panic. I said, what does panic does? He says, like, he's like 8 years old. He's like, it creates chaos. I'm like, yes, exactly. So that's we're gonna avoid. We're gonna
Absolutely.
communicate with each other,
Yeah,
and we are going to make sure that we just go back to the to the beach. And frankly, we work together, and in the end we were in a situation where everyone's looking at us and like, okay, are they coming back, or they're just drifting towards away from it. But in the end, I think the whole thing is about communication. We need to be
absolutely.
communicating on every step. We should avoid chaos. We need to make sure we always de-escalate the situation, and I think all the parties play a very significant role in it. And
Absolutely.
solicitors have a very, very important role to play, because they have they are legally bound, first of all. Plus, they are looking in best interest, even if it's buyer or the seller.
Exactly,
So
and it's very
that's
important for us to communicate that. And the reason why we say all of this is just to add on to your point, Avi, is we don't want any last minute surprises, because last minute
yes,
surprises, we can't do anything about that. But if we already anticipate that this is going to be a problem later on, we can start fixing that problem right away.
right away. Now
Yeah.
totally makes sense. Now, like, once we have done all this, and what is a Pexa settlement? So these days it's like an online settlement,
Yeah.
and there are charges involved to it. But what
Yes.
is a Pexa
Okay.
settlement?
Generally, all the transactions, all the property settlements used to happen on paper. When I say paper, when we settle a property for a buyer or seller, what goes on the day of settlement is, all the parties meet in one room. We get, if I'm acting for the buyer, I give bank checks to the seller, or my financier is there. My financier will give me the bank checks. I'll check and give it to the seller, and the seller will give me the transfer documents, and I'll give that transfer documents to the buyer. And it's a physical process of doing that. It's group of people getting together, settling a property. But with the introduction of Pexa, which is essentially abbreviation for Property Exchange Australia, it's an electronic way of settling a property, which means that I don't have to get out of my seat for settling a property. I can just sit here and just looking at a computer screen, I can see your property electronically being settled. And there are certain benefits to it when you settle electronically, and there are certain problems with Pexa. The
Okay.
problems are very minor. It's just that if it's a very complex transaction and if there is more than just doing transfer documents, then Pexa at this moment is not equipped to handle complex transactions. It is a very sophisticated software, but when it comes to highly complex transactions, then we would always have to resort to paper settlements. But Pexa settlements, say for example, a first home buyer is just buying an existing dwelling for 500,000 and it's a cash buyer, not even a financier, we would suggest that you go for Pexa settlement. Even if you have a financier, all the major banks are on Pexa. We have to send an invitation to the financier to join that workspace. Everyone comes on that workspace electronically, and we settle the
Wow.
entire thing
Like a
electronically.
Zoom
Right?
meeting. Okay.
Yes. And the benefit of that is we're not banking a check. If I'm acting for the seller, I'm not banking the check for at the bank and waiting for it to clear. It clears almost immediately. The money is transferred almost immediately. So you get that money appeared as cleared funds in your account immediately. The charges with Pexa is currently $54.07 for each parties. You will have to incur that $54.07. So if I'm acting for the buyer, I would address that. Do you want this to be a Pexa settlement? And
Okay. Yeah.
given the COVID environment, everyone's encouraging that we do a Pexa settlement rather than meeting in a room, getting together,
Yeah.
because
No.
the rate of infection and everything. We highly encourage that we do this electronically for the well-being of other people and the well-being of your own solicitor. So
No.
all of that,
It's
we
more like
recommend.
everyone for themselves. That's what it
Yes,
is.
that's
In
exactly it.
coronavirus, I think that's what it is. Like you have to take care of yourself. Doesn't matter.
Yes,
You know,
and
you
and with exactly, and with Pexa, you can even pay the council charges online. You can even pay your water bills online. Everything settles, and every party is paid right away. So there's no running around with your bank checks after the settlement.
So, like, I think this is going to be the last question, but it's one of those questions that haunt people a lot. Is my money safe in a trust account?
Yeah. Um, uh, I would start this with a recent conversation that I had with one of my clients a couple of days ago, and I had the same question. My client had transferred about 51,000, and I act for the buyer, and the seller is self-represented. When I say self-represented, they don't have a lawyer. So they said, we don't have a trust account. Can you hold the deposit for us in your trust account? And we did that. And the buyer said, well, I've transferred $51,000. How much will the seller get at settlement? And I said, what makes you think that there will be any deductions made? And their general understanding is that anything that goes into a trust account, there are charges that will come out of the trust account, and then less the charges is what is passed on. I would make this absolutely clear for everyone who's watching us today, or for the wider audience, that a trust account is a very absolutely a safe account for you to put in money. If you're putting money into your solicitor's trust account, we are bound by the Trust Account Act. We are bound by the act for not doing anything without your permission. We are holding that money as stakeholders. We are holding that money for you, so that there's always a confirmation. Whenever you sign a deal, the seller wants to see that you've made some sort of commitment. And the only way you can make a commitment is by paying some money. When I say paying money, you're not paying it to the seller, you're just putting it into a deposit holder's account, which is our trust account. And we send that receipt to the seller saying, look, they've paid, or look, they've paid to the XYZ trust account, and here is the money sitting. So there's absolutely nothing for you to worry about. The money in the trust account is safe. However, I would still recommend that when you do any sort of transfers, even before you do transfers, because of the sophisticated hacks, ring the person who has asked you for the money and tell them to confirm the trust account details. It's very important for you to call the person, confirm that this money is being transferred. Is it okay or not? Because there have been so many cyber hacks we've seen where the money is gone to a trust account, but essentially has never appeared because it has been interpreted in between. Money has been lost, and we don't want any sort of loss for our clients or for your clients, Avi.
Thank you very much for clearing that. I think that was one of those haunting questions. People like when it comes to money, is my money safe? Yeah, absolutely safe. And trust account means trust account. So you have to trust your solicitor in all that. All right, you can trust your solicitor with that money.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Varun. I think that was a very informative session. I've taken 40 minutes of your weekend time and you are in your office. And I think your background's pretty cool, mate. Are these all those files you're gonna work on today?
Not all, but some probably. Yes. Yeah.
Look,
Thank you
what I'm
for
gonna
the
do? Yeah, sorry.
opportunity. Thank you very much, and it's not absolutely worth my 40 minutes and your 40 minutes. And I thank you for the opportunity, and I love the incentive that you've put in and what you've achieved in the last couple of months. It's just been phenomenal.
Thank you very much, and that's because of grace of people like you who actually help me to bring these topics in the limelight so that people can listen to it, understand, and make the informed decisions.
Yes.
And because there's so much of misinformation in the on the web, on the Facebook, on social media, people are trying all sorts of scams, all sorts of misleading information to grab the attention. I
Yes.
won't name them, but most of the people know it, like
Yes.
who people are doing. But we are just trying to make sure that we do the right thing, give the right information, communicate. So these are your contact details. So I think they're pretty much on spot, isn't it?
Yes, that's it. That's my contact details.
And as RCR, so I can't even, it's a bit of, for me, it's a bit of hard.
RCR, fine.
RCR will do.
Yes.
so, so that's all you do. Like these are all the things you're dealing with. This company, it's a pretty big company, and your construction lawyers, business mitigation lawyers, solvency, compensation, conveyancing, family, and all that. So there's a lot of stuff that you guys are doing, and I must say it's a pretty impressive site. And these, oh, so you're in Melbourne, you're in Sydney, and you are in Brisbane. So that's
So I'm
your
in office in
details.
Brisbane, and we've also got offices in Sydney and Melbourne as well.
Awesome. So once again, Varun, thank you very much. And I will again would like to speak on all the other things that you look into, what construction law is and all that stuff
Yes,
in our incoming segments. But
absolutely.
thank you very much for coming and really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers.